In this tutorial, we'll be going over the concept of diversification. Diversification is a method used in order to reduce risk. The basic principle behind diversification is that the more assets you add to your portfolio, the less the risk of that entire portfolio. Let's say that your portfolio as it currently stands only consists of one asset. Let's call it asset A. Now let's say asset A has a certain expected return. Let's say the expected return of asset A is 20%. Asset A also has a certain amount of risk to it. Remember, the definition of risk is just a deviation away from what it is that you expect. So let's say that there's a risk that this asset's returns might decrease by 10%. So since asset A is the only asset in your portfolio, it means that your portfolio will have the same properties as asset A. So the expected return on your portfolio of one asset would be 20%, and the risk associated with your portfolio would be the risk associated with the underlying asset, which is asset A. So that's 10%. So if you deemed this risk of 10% in your portfolio to be too high, you would then add assets to asset A in order to reduce the overall risk of your portfolio. So let's say you added another asset, call it asset B. And asset B displayed the following properties. It had the same expected return as asset A, and it had a risk that is the same as the risk of asset A. Would this serve to reduce the risk in your portfolio? Well, the answer is no. The risk in asset A of a deviation of 10% mirrors the risk in asset B, which also has a deviation of 10%. So your portfolio risk would stay the same at 10%. So you have not reduced the risk here. What's the explanation here? Because you've added assets to your portfolio, but you have not reduced the risk. The problem here is that asset B has got the same risk properties as asset A. Now let's consider a different situation. Let's say you've got the same asset A again. So asset A still has the expected return of 20%. It still has a risk or a deviation from the expected return of about 10%. So you would look for an asset, let's call it asset C. So in asset C, you would look for an asset that at least matches the return that you're currently getting, but has got different risk properties. So let's say that the deviation from the expected return for asset C is 5%. The addition of asset C in your portfolio would result in the following. The return in your portfolio would stay the same at 20% because both underlying assets, asset A and asset C in your portfolio, are giving you 20%. And the risk of the entire portfolio would decrease. So let's take the risk of asset A, which is 10, plus the risk of asset C, which is 5, divided by 2. This gives us 15 divided by 2, which gives us 7.5%. We need to be careful here. This is not the statistical way of working this out, but for the purposes of our understanding, it's suitable. So the risk of the portfolio is 7.5%. So it has been decreased by adding asset C to our original asset that we had in portfolio, which is asset A. So the key takeaways are as follows. When you want to diversify as a way to reduce risk, it doesn't help you if you just add assets that have got the same properties as the assets that you currently have in your portfolio. So asset B behaved exactly the same way as asset A, and therefore your return as well as your risk, which is what we're focused on, did not decrease. You added more assets, but your risk did not decrease. Diversification only works when the asset that you're adding, so asset C in this instance, has got different properties to asset A. So when your assets are not perfectly positively correlated, meaning that they don't move in exactly the same manner, then you will get a benefit from diversification. You can diversify across industries so that the risks that are particular to one industry don't impact your portfolio as a whole. You can diversify across countries so that the risk of exposure to any one country is counteracted by having investments in other countries. You can diversify across different types of assets. Some assets or some companies do really well when the market is booming, and other assets do really well when the market is not booming, when the market is in a recession. But ultimately, the key takeaway is that you want to add assets to your portfolio which display different properties from the assets that you currently have in your portfolio. In that way, you'll be able to reduce the risk